Good evening, and welcome to Fireside Tales of Immunology. We have a fascinating story for you today, full of mystery, danger, and adventure. The Thymocyte, there and back again. Chapter the first, concerning Thymocytes. In a time not so long ago, and in an organ not so far away, there lived a Thymocyte. Not a nasty, digestive organ continually plagued with the affairs of human consumption, nor yet the distal peripheral organ with a perpetual influx of microbes and other immunogens. It was the thymus cortex, and that means nurture and comfort. Now, a thymocyte is a rather strange creature. It is of average size, larger than some, but smaller than others. And rumor held that in their maturity, the now T cell is the creature most versatile in all the realm, and most powerful by the accounts of some. Upon maturity and activation, some T cells have been known to be killers ever so fearsome, some with an even, let's say, natural disposition to the task. Others have been leaders great and powerful, leading countless numbers of immune cells into glorious battle against microbial invaders. Still others, after going out into the world and gaining certain knowledge, have returned to the young and inexperienced to instruct them, based on the memories of their adventures. But what is most certain about these T cells is that they all begin much the same, as thymocytes, untried and dreadfully naive to the goings-on of the world outside the thymus. Now, this is not to say that the life of your average T cell was by any means a boring one. In fact, the annals of immunohistory often told of the mighty deeds of mature T cells in the battles of old times. But it had been many a day since such activity had been seen, and life in the thymus, especially for those of the younger generation, to which belongs our hero, had become rather peaceful, occupied by the more simple matters of day-to-day living and development, and not much thought was often given to the world outside. But alas, stirrings and rumblings had recently begun to be felt even in the faraway reaches of the thymus, and strange whispers of a dark evil stirring in the south had begun to furrow the unweathered brow of many a naive cell. And it is of this matter that the tale of our hero is set to unfold. Now, this thymocyte was a very well-to-do thymocyte, and his name was Thomas. Well, actually, it was Theodorable Lymphoid Son. But that was a bit of information to which very few in the thymus were privy. Thomas was very much at home in the thymic cortex, and he had little desire to venture into the world outside. Adventures? Humph! Nasty business, adventures, as he would often say to his fellow thymocytes. It's a dangerous business, just stepping out your front door, just a step or two, and there's no telling where you might be swept off. But for poor Thomas, who had grown so accustomed to life in the lap of Stromal luxury, all this was about to change. Chapter the second, An Unexpected Journey. It was a rather unassuming day, and young Thomas found himself lingering in the medullary thymus, as was his custom, when suddenly a rather peculiar-looking cell appeared in very close proximity to Thomas. Quite too close, I might add. The name is Dendrolf the Grey, and a good day to you, wheezed the weathered dendritic cell. I was wondering if I could, perhaps, interest you in an adventure. Adventure? Now, I'm afraid, Mr. Dendrolf, that you'll not find much success spreading that sort of nonsense talk among thymocytes. If adventure is your purpose, I suggest trying the Narrows. They seem to have more affinity for that sort of thing. Oh, Thomas, whatever would your grandfather think, knowing his progeny had turned down the offer of an adventure from Dendrolf? He was not much older than you yourself when he set off on his first adventure, and he matured into a fine helper cell, one of the finest this body's ever seen, I might add. You've known now for quite some time that you cannot stay in the thymus indefinitely, dear Thomas, and I am quite positive that you would find this adventure to be in no way a negative experience. Upon saying these words, Dendrolf revealed at the end of his outstretched MHC2 receptor what appeared to be a very foreign peptide. Come now, an adventure always begins with the first small step. Though still reluctant, Thomas had felt much truth in what Dendroff had said, and without a word more in protest, he nodded, outstretched his complementary CD4 receptor, and grasped the foreign peptide. Quite sorry. Chapter the 3rd. No shoulder to spleen on. What happened next, Thomas was never quite able to recall in its entirety, but he soon found himself in the middle of a lymph node, buzzing with activity. "Ribbon cell," he whispered to himself. "I do believe Dendroff called this place Ribbon Cell." And although Thomas still felt a bit out of place amidst the hustle and bustle of activity that surrounded him, he couldn't help but feel a new sense of purpose and a taste for what some might even call adventure. Thomas soon found that he very much liked Ribbon Cell, much to his own initial surprise, and he never grew tired of the continual influx of new lymphocytes. He was at first put off by the large population of B cells at the node. He had always heard that they were pretentious bugs, always going on about their specificity and effector functions and whatever else, but he soon found them to be, on the contrary, a rather complimentary bunch. But Thomas had little time to grow accustomed to his new environment before the next step of his adventure began to unfold. One evening, while sitting alone at the bar of the Prancing Pony, an inn located in the riskier part of the node, near the high endothelial vessel, he was jolted from his stupor by a booming voice crying, "Adventure, my good lads!" followed by none other than Dendroff himself, bursting through the inn's door. "Dendroff!" cried Thomas. "Wherever have you been?" "Greetings, old friend," Dendroff responded. "I do apologize for my sudden absence. I, unfortunately, was suddenly called away on business. But it is good to see that you are making along quite well." Dendroff then proceeded to recount the details of his recent circulation, soon captivating the attention of a small group with his tales of desolation and devastation caused by a tapeworm that had embedded itself into the area and raised a giant cyst, causing much pain and suffering among the indigenous people, including both muscle and nerve cell tribes. The party was soon formed, with Dendroff, who promised to show them the way, and a group of B-cells of varying talents and skills, led by Limey Ironbody, a B-cell of some renown. The party formed. Each was given a different area of the cyst to attack in the battle to come. The B-cells were skilled in both ranged attacks, using detached and thrown antibodies, and even more close-range melee attacks with trapped antibodies. Thomas was not truly predisposed to be a warrior, but was quieter in action, more of a thief of information. He was used to slipping ahead and finding weaknesses of the enemy in advance, so as to prepare and help his comrades in the battle to come. Dendroff, of course, was the giver of the quest and designer of the battle strategy, so he assigned each of them different targets and tasks. He whispered to Thomas to pay close attention to the many carbohydrates on the cystic shell of the fearsome worm, Smapog, to learn for possible places for weapon attachment, similar to the peptide he had previously shown him. But before the party had traveled far, Dendroff again excused himself, claiming mysterious dendritic cell business. But the comrades in arms, though not yet used to one another and still quite distrustful, pressed onward along the road, leading them to the varied and tangled paths of the looming Thywood forest. Their destination was off a narrow stream leading out of the woods, but getting there through the dark and mysterious forest was a challenge. The way seemed clear to all, with the merest trace of chemokinetic scents on the watery winds highlighting the path they were to follow. But local scents were bewildering and ensnaring to the unwary. The entire party of B-cells were soon lured off the path by the phantom voices and chemokinetic scent of CXCL13, produced by the dark stromal cells of the wood's local nodes. Luring the party to a castle they had overtaken located high within a superficial inguinal lymph node, the dark stromal cells mulled over their plans to internally imprison the B-cells. If it wasn't for Thomas, who alone had not been lured by the dark stromal cell's chemokinetic scent, bravely risking a daring rescue of the group, the adventure may have ended there. Undeterred, he reminded the party of their mission, and following the faint traces of the chemokinetic scent produced by the devastation of Smapog, they finally emerged from the superficial inguinal lymph node, only to find themselves on the bank of the coursing femoral artery. Quite right. Chapter the 4th. Letting the good signs roll. Tumbling through the femoral artery, rolling along the banks, Thomas and the hearty band of B-cells found they were all too rapidly approaching their destination. "Look, they got through the hills so well and this will cross to reach our destination is ahead," cried Lively. "But we'll never be able to slow down enough to make it through, much less with all of our receptors still intact." But, trusting Drentroff's advice, Thomas ignored B-cell's frantic cries, closed his eyes, and stretched out his integrins as far as he could toward the river bank. Suddenly, as if by some strange magic, Thomas began to slow down, his roll soon coming to a stop right at the gap. "Keep him!" he cried. He began to slow himself by grabbing nearby rocks with strange words, endothelial hyaluronate, printed on them, stabilizing himself with a CD-44 harness. Following his lead, the party led by Limey Ironbody each grabbed the hold of the nearby rock until all had come to a stop. Heaving themselves onto the flow of the river, they came to a cleft in the canyon wall with the mysterious legend, "Speak, friend, and enter." Not knowing what this meant, or how to enter the gap, they paused for a while. Soon, though, through a mysterious mechanism unknown to this day, Thomas managed to open the gap in his party. Seeing the pathway, they began to crawl through a large tunnel with gap-jumped tree branches to grab onto and pull themselves through by. Soon, they entered the mussel wilderness, which lacked paths and streams, and saw the lonely cyst ahead. Heavy chemokinetic smoke from the devastation caused by Smapog's rampage through the area. Chapter the 5th. The Desolation of Smog. Approaching the lonely cyst, they saw the discarded husks and remains of brave leukocytic and monocytic warriors who had come before, including the giant corpses of the war machine macrophages. Members of this tribe, known by the name Innate Immune System, whose members were spread far and wide throughout the entire country, had all valiantly attempted to destroy Smapog. But their weapons were too blunt and could not find enough purchase on the carbohydrate portions of his armor. The smell of chemokines released as a warning to all nearby tribes was thick in the air. It seemed that they had arrived at their location at last. Before Thomas and his companions had much time to survey the desolation of Smapog, a sudden shrill cry rang out from the cysts, causing every receptor in their membranes to stand on end as they received the first paracellular signals indicating their target was at hand. But wait, there was more. They sensed a second threat, one their weapons would be useless against. Rising over the fierce stench of chemokinetic signals released by the dying cells, there came an odor unfamiliar to the party. Talking amongst themselves, they realized that while they were prepared to face Smapog, they had no idea whether their weapons would in any way threaten this new foe. So brave Limey Ironbody came up with a strategy. The reluctant Thomas would sneak near to the worm's lair and gather information on the state of Smapog, while Limey would send the brave Balantel to investigate the new-come army. So Thomas entered the lair of Smapog, intending to find out once and for all what weapon could harm him, remembering his father's advice. Every worm has a weak spot, though he was sure it was not from personal experience. Soon he approached Smapog's resting place, safe in his fist. There as he crouched, looking at the fearsome beast, thinking, "Oh, Smapog is weary and asleep. He can't see me and he won't hear me." He was startled when the worm spoke to him. "Well, beast, I smell your chemokines and I feel your disturbances in the plasma. Come along, admire me, for my cyst is like tenfold shields, and my exocytose proteins are death." To this, Thomas replied, "I've always understood that tapeworms were softer underneath, especially if one could bind to their carbohydrate projections on their armor." Your information is antiquated, snapped Smapog. My armor is impenetrable. Here, look. What do you say to this? Rolling over, he showed Thomas's fine cystic shell, including the receptor Thomas was looking for. Oh, fool, thought Thomas. Well, I really must not detain your magnificence any longer, or keep you from much-needed growth, he said, and hastily retreated to bear the information to his friends. Chapter the 6th. Out of the Frying Pan into the Fire. Rejoining the party, he saw that Balancel had almost returned with his scouting report. Once the noble B-cell had joined the other B-cells, he bade them draw close and told them his tale. Activated and energized with this new information, the B-cells began to switch out the hilts or clasps of their weapons, preparing for battle. But at first, they heard the report of courageous Balancel. There's an army come up to us below. It is full of Clostridium perfringens, and the very foundations of this country shake and liquefy before them. They are causing vast damage and necrotizing fasciitis wherever they advance, and they advance quickly. We cannot stand against them, cried Thomas, and the rest of the party contributed to the general uproar with shouts of agreement from the center. Quiet! bellowed a familiar voice, and silence fell as all turned to gaze upon the powerful visage of none other than Dendroth himself. But Dendroth, what shall we do about these pernicious invaders that cause such devastation? Inquired Liney. Well, my friends, you shall complete the adventure you set out upon and defeat Smapog. Meanwhile, I shall go forth, and as is his Indredic-filled duty, spread the word of these invaders to your cousin Dane, whose home is near here, so that he may bring forth an army of B-cells under his command to defeat these new invaders. Meanwhile, you shall fill the area with the scent of CCL 2, 3, 5, 7, and 8, as well as IL-8, so that the cells of the innate immune system whose home this is, while you go forth to battle Smapog. So saying, Dendroth no sooner finished speaking than put action to his word, immediately leaping to a nearby stream to travel to the node where Dane lived. Seeing no other choice, the party of B-cells, and a rather frightened Thomas, who, having completed his mission, wanted nothing more than to return home with word of his adventures, leapt into the fray. But before Thomas had a chance to catch a breath, he was suddenly struck by a misfired self-antibody which erroneously bound to him. As darkness closed around him, Thomas thought of his peaceful Thymus, and as all grew silent, the last he heard was the hopeful cry of one of the B-cells. The leukocytes are coming! The leukocytes are coming! Then all was silent. Thomas regained consciousness, only to be greeted by the sight of a phagocytic macrophage cleaning the field of corpses. But just as he was about to be inadvertently ingested, Thomas jolted awake, and leaping aside, cried, "I'm not dead yet!" much to the dreadful surprise of the poor phagocyte. From the macrophage, Thomas learned of the battle he had missed. It had been long and certainly fierce, but wishing to spare you the tedium, I shall not delve into the details of the matter. In brief detail, however, it delights me to say that using the information Thomas had brought, Smapog was finally defeated, and the party of B-cells smothered his army with a cloud of agglutinated antibodies, and when he could move no longer, his armor shredded to pieces, the TNF finally did its dreadful work upon the beast. As the secondary invasion of Clostridium perfringens, the bacterium was destroyed by upregulated members of the innate immune system, some of which point to Thomas, in fact, as the reason for their armament. But much devastation had taken place that dreadful day, leaving in its path much to be repaired and many questions to be answered. For perhaps it was the desolation left by Smapog that let such secondary invaders, normally easily repelled, to wreak such havoc. They were, in fact, known to live in similar climes, and it is not unreasonable to assume that perhaps they had come from the same place. But many that day could not help but worry. afterward, also entitled A Not-So-Long Way Home. As the group disbanded and went their separate ways, Thomas decided he would not take his full share of the glory, but instead claimed that his small collection of memories were more than enough for a simple T-cell like him. As he returned home, he made sure to stop along the way in Ravensall to share his memories, and then, bidding his friends a warm adieu, he finally headed home to the Thymus. It is said he remains there still, often recounting tales of his adventures to the younger generations of Thymocytes still snug in the thymic medulla, so that they too might one day be prepared should the scourge of the worm ever again threaten the land.